Okay, perfect. So welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. Please note that the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. You're also reminded to note that we may have members of the public press observing today's proceedings. Can I ask those who are observing today's meeting to keep their microphones and cameras switched off throughout? Can members of the local review body leave their cameras on but mute their microphone when not speaking? As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded that it should not leave the meeting during consideration of any of the reviews. This meeting has been convened in response to 4 requests for a review of the decision taken by the appropriate officer under the Council scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents listed in the notice calling the meeting. Now I ask Ms McBain, Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedures to be followed in the conduct of these reviews and take a roll call of all members present. Ms McBain.
Thank you, Convener. Members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process requires that all matters which applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this LRB is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replaced that with the local review body, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews by LRBs should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. I'll just quickly do a roll call for the recording. So, chairperson?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Alphonse?
Present.
Councillor Bolton?
Present.
Councillor Lawrence?
Present.
Thank you. And then for case 2, 3 and 4, we'll have Councillor Bowes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just going through the agenda, 1.1 procedural note to note. Okay, 2.2 is the first application to consider. So it's for first floor left, 16 Uckert Street, Aberdeen, AB245PJ, and it's change of use of flat to short term let accommodation, maximum occupancy of 4 people. We will now hear from Planning Advisor in attendance, Ms Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I'd point out that Ms Green attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because she has not been involved in the early consideration of the application under review. Ms Green will not, however, be asked to express any view in the merits of the proposed development, and in effect her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Ms Green.
Thank you, Convener. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Yes, as you said, the review is into the refusal of an application for a short-term let at 16 Urquhart Street. And just to mention that issue of sui generis, that means outside the use classes order, short-term lets fall outside the use classes as they are distinct from mainstream residential. And also don't fall into the same class as hotels and hostels. So just to cover that. The review has been submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following decision of the appointed officer, and the applicant has indicated that there are no new matters within the submissions. In terms of procedure, the applicant has expressed the view that the review may proceed on the basis of the information submitted. So I'll proceed to provide some background information before handing back to decide how to proceed. So this is the site here. Obviously, this is King Street going into the city centre, Mount Hooley, just off to that side. And the property is located on the east side of Urquhart Street, lying within a largely residential area. Properties immediately surrounding it are in mainstream residential use, and it's a first floor flat with windows onto both the east and west elevations of the building, so dual aspect. And these are just taken from Google Street View, and obviously the 3D view there of the property. So it's the first floor flat. And it's, as you can see, a 2.5-storey granite tenement. It has garden area to the rear, and there are 6 flats in the building, 2 on each floor, all accessed from the front door on Urquhart Street and via the communal staircase internally. And the report notes that it assumes the other flats are in mainstream use with no applications showing for short-term lets in the building. So the first floor plan, flat has 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, a joint living room, kitchen and bathroom. And the applicants advised that the maximum occupancy would be 4 people with a minimum stay of 3 nights. It would be a change of use. They're applying for a permanent change of use, and customers would utilise the existing on-street waste collection. There's no off-street parking, and there's no control on parking in the area. So turning to reasons for the decision in the case officer's report. Firstly, detrimental impact on the residential amenity of neighbours within the building. That's things like comings and goings within the communal areas, noise transferring through floors and walls, etc. And that it would therefore be contrary to policy H1 on residential areas in the local development plan and policy 30 on tourism in the national planning framework. Secondly, short-term let is a tourism-related use, and this is not within the city centre or on land allocated for tourism, which are the 2 criteria noted in policy VC2 on tourism and culture. So for the applicant disagrees that there would be a detrimental impact on neighbours and states that good positive relationships are maintained and no concerns have been raised by neighbours. Secondly, they state that although it's not in line with the locational requirements of policy VC2, i.e. being in the city centre or on an allocated site, there should be exceptions to that where there's no disruption to residential amenity, and it's noted that there are no objections from neighbours. Thirdly, they note that short-term lets have broad advantages of supporting local tourism and the city's economy. And lastly, they'd be happy to accept modifications to address any concerns and work with the local community to ensure that there's no harm to existing residents. So finally, in terms of consultations, there were no objections from roads. There's no parking linked to the flat, and it's the same situation as a mainstream flat, so it'd be no different in impact. There are good active travel routes and public transport. Environmental health had no objections, and the Castle Helen Pittodrie Community Council, there was no response received. And as I said, there are no objections or letters of support. So at that point, I will hand back to you for members to consider how to proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Green. So we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members, a reminder, if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request that further written information be provided, hearings be arranged, or a site visit be undertaken. At the moment, I feel we have sufficient information to proceed, but I'll go around the room and see how everyone feels. Councillor Alphonse.
Yes, I feel we've got enough information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton.
Happy to proceed.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence.
Oh, okay, happy to proceed, yeah.
Thank you. Okay. As members feel they have sufficient information, we will now hear from Ms. Green again on the relevant policies and considerations for this review. Ms. Green.
Thank you. So moving on to the policies, these are the policies that are referred to in the report of handling and are relevant to the application determination. Policies 1, 2 and 3 on climate crisis, mitigation and biodiversity. They are applicable to all applications. However, members may wish to note that this is an application for change of use only with no physical works. So in terms of considering the magnitude of any impact. Oh, I lost my connection for a moment then. Is it still, are you still seeing the slides?
Yeah, we can still hear you and we can still see the slides. Thank you. In terms of waste policy, the on-street bins are being used by short-term lets, and the site is accessible by public transport and active travel in terms of policy 13. Policy 30 on tourism was used by the case officer as the basis for refusal, and the next slide will consider that in more detail. So this is policy 30. So I've highlighted the most relevant criteria here. Basically, development proposals for tourism facilities, which would include short-term lets, will take into account contributions to the local economy, compatibility with the surrounding area in terms of the nature and scale of the activity and impacts of increased visitors, impacts on communities, for example, in terms of the provision of homes and services for local people. And the next criteria is opportunities for sustainable travel, appropriate management of parking and traffic, etc. And also looking at section E, in terms of short-term lets, they will not be supported where proposals would result in unacceptable impacts on local amenity, the character of the neighbourhood or area, and secondly, the loss of residential accommodation where that loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. So these are policies from the local development plan that were referred to. I'll just highlight a couple of those in the next slide, the residential areas and tourism. Sites zoned within a residential area, so that policy H1 is relevant, and VC2, as I noted from the review of the reasons for refusal. Policies D1 on design and D2 on amenity consider the contribution of the building to the public street and surrounding area, as well as the level of amenity for occupiers. And these have limited relevance in this proposal for change of use, as there are no physical works. Obviously, waste management requirements for new developments. We've mentioned the on-street bins, and sustainable transport and parking we've also covered. So just looking at in a bit more detail at residential areas and the tourism policy.
residential areas, which is obviously it's zoned within a residential area. So for non-residential uses, which is, although it's quasi-residential, it's actually a non-residential use. So they will be supported only if they are considered complementary to residential use, or it can be demonstrated that the use would not cause conflict or nuisance to residential amenity. And then the tourism policy, similar considerations to the policy in the National Planning Framework. And it just says in this second paragraph, proposals should complement existing visitor facilities and be sequentially located in the city centre or on sites allocated for that use. So it's obviously envisaging a range of tourist facilities in that, but still of relevance to short-term lets as well. And in terms of those two policies, members may wish to consider the number of visitors using the flat, with the application stating that it would be a maximum of 4 occupants within the 2 bedrooms, and also its location within the building at first floor level. So I've got this slide from the Scottish Government's publication on short-term lets, and it highlights how they can make an important contribution to the tourist economy because of offering visitors the particular tourist experience through a host's local knowledge. Offering accommodation in places not served by hotels, but offering more affordable accommodation, and also its additional capacity in areas of high demand. And there's also Scottish Government research findings, which are that the most common positive impact of short-term lets is local economic impact associated with tourism. So moving on to the evaluation, obviously the application should be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, with a careful assessment of each application on its merits. So for this particular decision, the site's zoned within a residential area. So first question would be, what is the impact on amenity within that area in terms of those policies, H1, VC2 and policy 30? The appropriateness of the location for a short-term let, in terms of what the policies say about that, and also is there a positive impact on the local economy, or would there likely to be? So overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan when considered as a whole, or are there material considerations which would weigh for or against the proposal? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any members have questions from the screen?
Could I? I don't think we'll probably know this, do we? But do we know of any of the properties within the building have HMOs on them?
There is an overlay, but the case officer's report didn't highlight any evidence of anything, and usually they would check a GIS overlay.
Okay. No, that's okay if you don't have it. It wasn't mentioned, but I think it's relevant. But that's fine. It's okay, Lucy. Thank you.
Just in terms of the applicant's letter, supporting letter that they submitted, it notes that they've maintained a positive and cooperative relationship with other property owners in the building. Has the property applied for being used as a short-term let up until the time that an application requires to be submitted?
As far as I'm aware, this is a new property to be used as a short-term let. Obviously, they would need to go through the licensing process, which would consider some of the issues that planning can't consider, you know, in terms of behaviour of guests. But yeah, my understanding is up to now it hasn't been used as a short-term let.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone at the moment. So in accordance with the procedural note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations related to the case have been considered and taken into account. Determination. So at this point, I would probably uphold officers' recommendations within policy 30, EI and II with the impact to local amenity and the loss of residential property. This is quite a strong local residential area. There's no other sort of short-term lets, hotels, and et cetera, in the vicinity. I note that the short-term let policies that we have before us from the Scottish Government sort of highlight city centre. This is out with the city centre as far as I'm of understanding. So I would be looking towards refusal of this at this time to hold officers' recommendations. I'll just go around the room and see if anyone has anything. Councillor Bolton.
Actually, I would be overturning the officer's recommendation on this one. The area is reasonably well situated for Old Aberdeen, for the university, for the beach, and for the sports village, which holds a number of sort of it's not conferences, but events where people come for long weekends to attend things. So I think actually it's really well placed. It's got a mixture of uses in terms of residents, because we often see a lot of, and this is why I asked about HMOs, it can be heavily occupied by students. So if you like, they're almost short rents, but long rents, because they tend to be there for over the academic term. So, you know, there's no objections from the Community Council. There's no objections from any of the residents. And I know it's a different area, but in licensing, if there's HMOs coming, you soon hear about it. And we've seen the same with the short-term lets. So for me, I don't think it'll detract from the residential amenity. I think that there's sufficient activities in the areas which would be attractive and would be benefit, because there's not major hotels in that vicinity for people to stay in. They would have to travel. It's good access to public transport. If you're fit, you can walk to the city centre. So actually, whilst there's a level of tension perhaps with VC2, I think in general terms, given there's no objections, I would actually be supportive of it, because of the nature of many of the other properties that are occupied generally by a lot of students, and the access to, as I say, some of our tourist attractions of Old Aberdeen, the beach and the sports village. So I'll be slightly different from you, convener, on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alphonse.
Thank you, convener. I actually agree with Councillor Bolton. I think it's well placed for all the reasons that she stated, and happy to go ahead with the application. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, I agree with yourself.
Oh, you've popped yourself mute. There we go.
Right, here we go. You got me now. I would agree with yourself and uphold the officer's decision.
Okay. Thank you very much. So,
convener, as we've got 4 members and there's two members would like to uphold the decision and 2 would like to overturn, you have the cast and vote.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Always a difficult one, this one. We've got 4 members. I'm minded with the proposals put forward by Councillor Bolton in terms of closest to the university and beach amenities, and with the lack of hotels in that area. I understand this may tie into visitors and families of students who may visit this area in light of the university. Therefore, I will be withdrawing my refusal on this, and I will be supporting the application.
Okay, Thank you. So just to confirm, the application will be overturned and approved. Okay.
Yep, that's correct. So
Is
therefore,
there any, sorry, I was just going to say, but you're, say just if there's any conditions, if you like, attached.
I don't think there's any additional conditions to put on. I'm quite content with the applicant saying that there's only going to be for a limited time of up to 3 days short-term let that time. So we're not really extending anything massively there. Miss Green.
Yeah, one condition that we have been putting on short-term lets is for a 5-year or 10-year consent, just because of the situation with housing demand and need. So I don't know whether you want to consider that. It just allows reconsideration of the proposal after that time in the light of the housing market.
Yeah, I think our current cycle is 5 years at the moment. Are members content to go with 5 years? Okay, thank you very much. Therefore, the local review body has therefore agreed to, by majority, overturn the application with a consideration of the 5-year application on this one. Okay, thank you very much. So turning down to second review, and I understand the third review is of similar nature as well, so just be reminded for that one. So the second review is in decision to refuse the application of the formation of a first floor extension over existing garage and extensions to front and rear dormers at 6 Morningside Avenue, Aberdeen, 230683. We'll now hear from planning advisor and attendance Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide us a brief description of the planning application and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. As again, Ms. Green attends today's meeting to provide professional planning guidance, as she has not been involved in the previous applications. Ms. Green.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen again.
And just to note, we have Councillor Bouse back with us.
This is the one we're hearing first, isn't it? 6 Morningside. Sorry, I've switched off my agenda.
Yeah, 6 Morningside is the first one.
Number 6
Thank you.
first. Sorry. Right. As you mentioned, this is a request for review against a refusal of the application for formation of first floor extension over an existing garage and extensions to the front and rear dormers at 6 Morningside Avenue. And the applicant has indicated that there are no new matters within the submissions. In terms of procedure, the applicant is content for the review to proceed on the basis of the information submitted. So I'll proceed to provide some background information before handing back to discuss the case and decide how to proceed. So the location of the application on the west side of Morningside Avenue, and the more detailed location plan showing the application relates to a semi-detached house which has a driveway to its north side and it joins number 8 to the south, whilst the garage actually adjoins the garage of number 4. So this is from Google. It's a little bit unclear there, but that's the garage at the side. And there's an extension to the rear as well. And again, from Google, 3D image of the house, which is this one. So you can see the neighbouring property, which has had an alteration to the roof there. It's the profiles. Well, it was originally like this side of the house, but it's been extended over the garage and then has a clipped corner on the roof, which we'll see in further slides. So this is the application property. You can see that the other half of the semi has been extended there in the past. So this is where the extension would be. And a 3D image from Google of the rear of the property. See the extension at the back of the garage there. And then the neighbour's house. So this is the front extension as existing. So that I've just to fit them on, this is at a smaller scale, obviously. The roof ridge isn't altering. So the proposal is to extend the first floor over the garage, including moving forward the front of the garage slightly so that it's in line with the house. Front dormer would be extended across, and that would be 8.2 meters long to the front. The materials would match the existing house, so they would use grey and pink granite over the garage. And vertical tiling to the dormer infill panels, and white timber fascia to the dormer. Just have a look at the rear elevation. Obviously, the existing hipped roof that's just showing the rear extension, and there's no changes to that rear extension. The roof would be extended across with this clipped edge, and the dormer again extended across, and that would be 8 meters in length overall. Also to mention, the roof of the dormer is just increased in height to accommodate new insulation. Ground floor plan, there's not much change to the ground floor, just the garage pulled forward front there, so to be level with the main house, and that would be built up in granite. Otherwise, no changes at ground floor level. So this is, I've got two separate slides here with the existing and proposed first floor. So this is proposed, and you can see the additional accommodation above the garage. And then, so under the proposal, there would be 3 bedrooms, 1 ensuite, and a study, and also main bathroom. So just to show you the existing, obviously 3 bedrooms, slightly smaller, and a bathroom. So they would gain the study, the ensuite, larger bedrooms. And then this is a side elevation. Obviously, it would be hard up against the neighbour's house, with just a very narrow gap. I've got a cross section of that in a moment, so you'll understand it. This is the existing wall, and then the build up of the front of the garage, and the gable, which wouldn't really be seen, and then the clipped edge of the roof. That's just comparing to the existing with the hipped roof. It's a cross section through the proposed development. You'll see the dormer front and rear, and that's the front of the garage built up. And then this is just another section through the stairs. This drawing shows the existing situation. So this is the application house with the garage, and then this is the neighbour with their past extension, a hipped roof to a clipped. And then this is with the extension, the other half of the house of the semis. And then just to look at that join between the proposed extension and the neighbouring house, this is how it would be. Would be a very narrow gap that's just wider than the gutter, and then a further gutter down at the bottom. So it would be a very narrow gap at the upper level. This slide just shows the conservation area to the rear. As it's mentioned in the case officer's report, there's actually no access along the back here, so there wouldn't be a public view from this part of the conservation area. So reasons for refusal, which are stated in full in the report, but the key points are that the scale and design are not compatible with the house and would adversely unbalance the pair of semis due to the form of the roof, and that it also overwhelms the existing house due to the form and massing, resulting in overdevelopment. That the extension would create a terrace with no distinction between the applicant's house and the neighbour, with an adverse visual impact on the surrounding area and the street. Third reason, that the proposed front and rear dormers would overwhelm the roof slopes, exacerbating the impact of the development, and that the length of the dormers is larger than is prevalent within the character on the street. That the rear dormer is not largely glazed, and its positioning above the ridge of the extension, and also that the front dormer is not glazed at the extremity, which is a reference to the guidance which recommends that. And as a result, the proposal is contrary to policies on design, residential areas in the local plan, and policies 14 on design and 16 on quality homes in the National Planning Framework. So just moving on to the applicant's case. They state that proposals would reflect the scale and design of the house and don't dominate or overwhelm. They point out that the streetscape is a mix of house types and their various alterations over time. Thirdly, they state that the design is consistent with the original house, and also that there are many alterations in surrounding streets. They note that the roof would mirror that at 4 Morningside, that there are similar extensions at a number of other properties, 8 Morningside, approved in 2011, which was considered of suitable scale and design. Several other extensions are noted there. Also, that the property and its surroundings are not in a conservation area, that the existing first floor has restricted ceiling height within the hipped roof, that they have personal reasons to stay in the area, which are expanded upon within the statement, and the proposal complies with policy 14 and NPF 4, that it's in a sustainable location and the proposals adapt for family life. And finally, that there are no representations and no detrimental impacts on neighbours. There are further points on the next slide. They state that the householder design guide is not yet adopted and its weight is therefore at the discretion of decision maker. On that point, that's now changed, and the householder guide, along with other Aberdeen planning guidance, has been approved at council. So that situation's changed. The applicant states that the dormers do comply in terms of their position and window placement with the householder guide, that overcrowding of the roof, which is a term from the case officer's report, is undefined, that the proposed roof shape would not match the adjoining semi, as that's been extended to a straight gable. That's the one that's joining on to the applicant property. However, there are many variations within the street, and the case officer's view is sort of subjective in the opinion of the applicant. And they point out that the gardens are largely untouched in size, and therefore this isn't overdevelopment. And finally, it complies with policy D2 on amenity, with no impact on daylighting, sunlighting, privacy, and amenity space. So also to note, there were no objections from the roads team. There were no comments received from Braeside and Manorfield Community Council. So at that point, I'll hand back to you, convener, for members to decide whether you have sufficient information to proceed.
Thank you very much, Green. So we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members, as a reminder, if we do not feel we have enough information, we can request further written information, hearings to be arranged, or a site visit to be undertaken. I, at this point, feel we have sufficient information to proceed, so I'll just go around the room. Councillor Rice.
Yep, happy to proceed.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, happy to proceed.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton.
There's been no request for any site visit or anything, so I'm happy to proceed with the information we have.
Thank you. And Councillor Alphonse.
Likewise, I'm happy to proceed. Thank you.
Okay. Those members feel they have sufficient information. We will now pass back to Ms. Green, who will take us through the relevant policies and considerations for this review. Ms. Green.
Thanks. So first of all, policies from the National Planning Framework. As I've noted previously, the policies on climate change, mitigation and biodiversity are overarching, less pressure on householder applications to, as they are not of a scale to really have an impact on those issues. Policy 7 is noted because of the nearby conservation area. Policy 14 relates to design and is similar to policies on design in the local plan, which I'll cover in a moment. And policy 16, I'll also note in the next slide, and it seeks a range of types of high quality home. So for policy 16, supports householder proposals where they don't have a detrimental impact on the character and quality of the home and the surrounding area in terms of their size, design and materials. And secondly, don't have a detrimental impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties in terms of their physical impact, overshadowing or overlooking. And then design policy, where proposals will be designed to improve the quality of the area, and regardless of their scale or location. So looking at the relevant policies in the local development plan, the site zoned within a residential area and policy H1, and I've got the next slide, we'll have a look at that. Policy D1 on design, that will be covered in a slide in a moment as well. Policy D2 on amenity, that covers things like impact on privacy of neighbours, any impact on daylighting and sunlighting, and it's noted that the case officer didn't raise those as issues of concern in the refusal. And then policy D6 on historic environment. Similarly, there's no public view from that area of the conservation area. So just to note that. Aberdeen planning guidance, as I noted, has now been approved by Council and is a significant material consideration in the determination of applications. And the two that are relevant are the Householder Design Guide and the Materials Planning Guidance. So looking at policy H1, and that states that household development will be approved dependent on these criteria. Firstly, whether the proposal constitutes overdevelopment. Secondly, does it have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the surrounding area? The third criteria, in this case, there is no loss of open space. And criteria for, well, the most relevant one in this case is the Householder Guide, which I'll have a look at on another slide in a moment. This slide looks at policy D2 on amenity. It looks at plot coverage and states that it shouldn't exceed twice the original house. I've just noted there from the case officer's report that with the proposal in place, which this proposal actually only increases the footprint by a very small amount, but it would result in the coverage being twice the original. So it would be up to what's recommended in the policy. Privacy of neighbours and daylighting and sunlight are also covered by that policy. And this is the general design policy. High quality design is sought for all development proposals with a view to improving the overall quality of areas. And it's recognised that not all development will be of a scale that makes a significant placemaking impact, but it just recognises that good design and detail adds to the overall attractiveness of the built environment in all areas. And design is assessed further through the Householder Design Guide. I'll just move on to that. So there's a general principle, which is that extensions should be architecturally compatible in design and scale with the original house and surroundings. Materials should be complementary. It also states that extensions shouldn't overwhelm or dominate original buildings and be visually subservient. It highlights that extensions approved prior to the guidance would not be justification for the approval. That adjoining semis should be consistent in roof form to maintain balanced appearance, and that dormers, there are specific criteria for their positioning on roofs and the design of them, including that glazing should dominate the front of the dormer and it should be positioned at the end. So I've just taken part of the Householder Guide that refers to hipped roof extensions, and it's just making that point that the practice of extending a hipped roof on one half will not be accepted unless the other half of the building has already been altered in this way. So in this instance, the other half of the building is a straight gable. And then the primacy of the development plan, which is obviously National Planning Framework and the local development plan, with all applications being determined in accordance with the plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, whilst also each application being treated on its merits. So the basis for the decision in this case, would the proposals comply with zoning policy H1? And in terms of that policy, how would they affect the character and visual amenity of the area? Is the size of extension and its relationship to neighbours acceptable? Do the dormers overwhelm the roof slopes to the detriment of the area? And I've just noted there that the APGs have been approved by the council. So overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan when considered as a whole, or are there material considerations for or against the proposal? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Do members have any questions for Ms. Green?
Could I, oh, sorry. Oh,
Councillor Bolton.
sorry, I should put my hand up. Could we go back to the pictures of the actual photographs of the streetscape, please? I was trying to count the number of slides, but I lost track, so I can't help you out.
Yes. Yeah, or I can look on Google if you prefer. I'll just run through all of them.
I think it's the one after that, possibly. Yeah, that one's helpful. I just want to have a look.
There's that one as well.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you. That was all.
Councillor Alphonse.
Thank you. Just to confirm that the house, if you're looking at the house, the one on the right and the one on the left are also built right to the boundaries of their adjoining neighbour. Is that correct?
Yes, I can go on to Street View if that helps. Yeah, so that that's the applicant house. That one's onto the boundary there.
Okay.
That's the other half of the semi.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bolton.
Sorry, could I get you to take up the actual drawings of the proposed and existing for the front and the rear, please?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Did you want to see the ones that were with the other houses in the street, or the individual?
With the other house next to it, so please.
Just that one. Can you see that? Oh no, I'm not sharing the screen, sorry. Just enlarge it. Oops.
And can we see, have you got the rear as well? Is that possible, please?
I don't think there was a rear one.
No, there's not a rear.
Like that. There's a rear elevation of.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just I can see. I was just trying to see where the. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions at all? Okay. So, in accordance with the procedure and note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. Determination, members.
Happy to start if you want.
Yeah, happy.
Yeah. Again, I would be overturning the officer's recommendations. I think we've seen from both the aerial view and the streetscape that there's a mixture of styles, and notwithstanding that each house application is on its own merit. And I appreciate that things can come through at different times, but in general terms, most of the policies don't change that much. And the supplementary Aberdeen Planning supplementary guidance wasn't in place when this application was determined. So whilst we can realise it now, you know, obviously what was in front of the case officer at the time, it wasn't approved until I think it was last week, wasn't it? So for me, does it have an impact on residential H1? I don't think it's overdevelopment, and I don't think it impacts on the character of the area. I think we've seen a number of different styles with rear extensions and up to the boundary. I think if we look at the house next door, it's got that slight quirk at the top of the roof. I think we've got to make houses that people can live in, and people are using their houses differently now. That's, I think, hence the reason maybe for a study requirement for working from home. I think if we look at quality placemaking, I think the fact that we can put on around conditions around the materials, we've heard quite a lot from the screen about the different materials, which again match what's already there, but we can condition that they're provided a sample of for approval. D2 we've heard doesn't relate, and I think D6 again doesn't really relate. I think if we were to say everything was near to a conservation area, I think we'd be stretching it a little bit far. So for me, on balance, because there is a level of subjective views in here, but I would be moving to overturn the officer's recommendation, and I'd look to the screen to offer any relevant conditions that would be required. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. I've got a hand from Ms. Christie.
Yes, convener and members, I would just say that despite the report mentioning the householder development guide being of less weight at the time, now that it is approved, it is a material consideration, so the decision needs to be made in relation to that being a material consideration today. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
I'll just come back and say it. I was taking that onto account, but I was just mentioning the fact it wasn't in place at the time, so that was all. But I'm still content with what I've moved. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification point on that. I'd be minded to support the comments of Councillor Bolton. I'm looking at all the documentation for us at the moment. I note that a number of neighbours in the local vicinity as well have also had that extensions. And I think actually in terms of policy D1 quality placemaking, it is of a quality design to the quality of the overall occupants in the property. So therefore I'm content with the policies that we're proposing here, although I am happy to consent the condition of the materials to be submitted just to ensure that we are matching to what's around us here. So I'm content to take that on. Just go around the room. Councillor Flants.
Thank you, convener. I agree with Councillor Bolton and yourself. I think at the moment it actually looks uneven, the street. I think it'll even it up. And because the other neighbours have built to the boundary, I think it's quite fair. I think it'll look better. The front of the house will look better. And yeah, no, I'm happy to overturn the recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, I do agree. It takes a little bit more uniformity into the street. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Bolton, and I think the fact that the neighbours haven't complained, the community council haven't made any comment, I think it's probably the right decision to overturn the officer's decision.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Bowes.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, also in agreement with Councillor Bolton and some of the other comments been made to overturn the decision.
Okay, thank you very much. Are all members content with the condition of the materials to be submitted? Okay. Therefore, the local review body has agreed to unanimously overturn the officer's recommendations on this, and the decision will be sent out within the next couple of days. Thank you very much, members. Okay, so we're now turning to the consideration of the third review in respect to the decision to refuse the application of the erection of the first floor extension over the garage to the side and formation of dormers to the front and rear of 31 Morningside Avenue 230767. We'll again hear from Planning Officer in attendance, Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application or proposal and a reminder of reasons why the application is refused. Just a reminder that Ms. Green attends because she's providing professional planning guidance and has not been involved in any of the considerations up to now. Ms. Green.
Thank you. I'll share my presentation again. Okay, so as you mentioned, this review relates to an application refused at 31 Morningside Avenue for the erection of first floor extension over the existing garage to the side and the formation of dormers to the front and rear. And this one sits obviously on the same street, but a bit further south. Pull up the location plan. It's also on the east side of Morningside Avenue, and another semi-detached house. Has a driveway and garage to the southwest side and is attached to number 29, whilst the garage to the side adjoins number 33. So moving on to some Google images. This is the property here. Again, it's a similar house type, a semi-detached, with the front doors sort of located centrally within the pair. Hipped roofs on both sides of the pair of semis, and then this garage belongs to number 31. And the houses were built in the 1950s. And there are existing flat roof dormers to the front and box dormer to the rear. So this is the rear of the house, and you can see that the land falls away really quite steeply there. It's almost a story level. The garden's almost a story level below the level of the back of the house. So that's the garage and extension to the side there. And then at the neighbour's house, there's a narrow sort of infill at the next to the gable wall. And then this is the street view of the house. This is where the extension would go. And you can note that the neighbouring house at number 33 has a first floor extension to the roof. It's actually a different house type. So it's the type for those semis is that they have within each house, there's a central front door with 2 bay windows each side. So the neighbour's extension has actually just affected the roof. There wasn't a garage there. You can see that the chimney was always on the end of the gable. So they've just sort of unhipped the roof, if you like. And also to note that the application house sits on slightly higher ground than the neighbour to the south. So that's just the site plan with the roof as proposed at number 31, showing the 2 enlarged dormers. And again, they've got this clipped roof style over the extension to over the garage. Elevations, again existing. You can see the existing chimney there on the hip of the roof. And then this extension, the chimney would remain in place. Roof extended out over the garage. And that's to the rear, so you can just see this outline, which is the neighbouring house here. Obviously sits on slightly lower ground. Again, it's a clipped roof that they would be proposing. Again, materials would match with the blue-black slate to the same as the existing house. Windows in UPVC, white fascia to the dormers, and dry dash render to the infill panels. Then the side elevation, proposing dry dash render, and then the slate to the actual roof. Again, not much change at the ground floor level. The front wall of the garage would be brought forward to level with the main house. And at first floor level, they would provide 3 beds and a bathroom in the proposed development rather than the 2 bedrooms in the existing house. And this is a cross section as proposed, showing the 2 extended dormers. So reasons for refusal from the case officer's report. First of all, scale and design are not compatible with the original house. The proposal adversely unbalances the semi due to the form of the roof, and it overwhelms the existing house due to the form, and also interfering with the chimney. Second point is that there's conflict with the character of the area, as most properties have balanced tipped roofs, and also with the chimney in the centre of the resultant house. Thirdly, that the proposed front dormer would overwhelm the roof slope, interfering with the appearance of the chimney and diverging from the character of dormers in the street, and therefore that the proposal would be contrary to policies on design, residential areas in the local plan, and policy 14 on design in national planning framework. Then again, I've noted the position with the householder guide, Aberdeen planning guidance. Moving on to the applicant's case can be summarised as follows. They state that several semis in the area have been altered to replace hipped roofs with gables, that the development is largely to the side over the garage, and they really highlight the difficulty in extending the house to the back because of the topography, and that an extension there would be overbearing on neighbours. Also, obviously, if it was developed to the front, it would break the building line, and there would be an alternative impact on neighbours from other proposals to extend the house. They state that the 2-bed houses in the area are those that are being extended as a general case, and that they are small for modern needs. They state that over time, several houses have been extended to the side within the area, and where there are unaltered properties adjoining those, the current householder guides makes these undevelopable. So with reference to the householder guide, they state that such a proposal would not, as a result of the existing streetscape and character of the buildings therein, result in any adverse impact on the character or visual amenity of the wider area. I couldn't actually find that in the householder guide, so I don't know if it's come from an older version, but I mean, that would be something that would be a material consideration, whether the proposal actually does have an adverse impact on the character of the area. So I think the point it makes is relevant. Further points made by the applicant, looking at the group of 4 houses on this stretch of the street, the proposal creates balance in this section, as number 33 already has a gable extension. They state that they provide examples of other houses with varying extensions, and state that the streetscape is a mix of house types with their various alterations, even though many of those may predate the householder guide. They comment on the blank wall above the garage door. I think that's a response to the case officer's comments on that. And also the treatment of the chimney and the scale of the dormer, stating that overall the design is still acceptable. They state that the dormers comply in terms of their position on the roof and in terms of window placement on the dormers themselves, so that they comply with householder guidance. In terms of the chimney, they state that it wouldn't be highly visible because of the proposed dormer and the design of the extension. However, they state that number 20 Morningside Crescent, which is just to the east, is an example of a similar recent approval. I did have a look at that on Street View, and it's a single-storey extension with the chimney retained at the end of the original gable. And their final point is that in terms of the dormer to the front, there are many examples of similar developments, and it complies with specific guidance on dimensions in the householder guide. So also to mention, there were no objections from the roads team and no comments received from Braeside and Manorfield Community Council. There were 2 letters of support received, and they made the points that the proposal would complement the surrounding area and would not negatively impact neighbours, and that refusal of the application would impact on the sale and upgrading of other properties in the area. So at that point, I'll hand back to you, convener, for members to decide on how to proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Green. I understand this application is quite similar to the previous application. Can I just check with Ms. Christie if we are okay to proceed to determination or if we need to review through the policies?
Yes, convener, it's up to the committee how they would want to decide to go on. I do think the applicant asked for a site visit, so you need to determine everything through the policies. Sorry, I don't know if I'm answering your question. If you could maybe clarify again.
Maybe if I could be helpful, having done a few of these in the past, we do need to marry the application against the policies, because that's how it's been determined. So that's how we have to determine planning applications against policy. So unfortunately, we can't just skip this section. It's probably the most vital section that we should be considering. So yeah, I would recommend that we don't miss it.
Not a problem. So we'll just quickly go through the room in terms of going forward. So if we feel we have enough information to decide, or if we need any further written hearings or a site visit to be undertaken. At this moment, I'm quite content for us to proceed. I'll just quickly go around the room. Councillor Bolton.
Likewise.
Councillor Alphonse.
I agree.
Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, happy to proceed.
And just to note, Councillor Bowes has had to step away, so he's not taking part in any further of today's meeting. Okay, so therefore we have some. We feel that we have sufficient information. We'll now pass back to Ms. Green, who will take us through the relevant policies. Ms. Green.
Yes, thanks. I'll just share the screen. I was just whizzing through the slides there, so I have to put it back to the right place. Right. Might be helpful for me to highlight that the same policies do apply. In terms of the merits of this case, obviously there's a different situation with the houses either side of this, and it's in a different area of the street, and then the topography of the site that falls away to the east. So I'll just go through the policies. National Planning Framework policies. In particular, policy 14 was used as a reason for refusal That relates to design and is similar to the policy in the local plan. So design is mainly for householder applications. We look at the householder development guide, which have been approved recently. So I've got this slide on policy 16 in NPF 4, where householder development proposals will be supported where they do not have a detrimental impact on the character of the area and don't have a detrimental impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties. And then design policy 14, which looks for quality design regardless of scale. The application property, as for the previous one, falls into a residential area in the local development plan. So that policy is relevant, as well as design and amenity, as we've mentioned. And then the householder guide has been approved by council and is a significant material consideration. So policy H1, proposals will be accepted for residential development, providing they're not overdevelopment, they don't have an unacceptable impact on character and amenity of the area, there's no loss of open space, and then the final criteria relates to the supplementary guidance, which is now the Aberdeen planning guidance. Policy on design advocates high quality design, and as I said before, all development is not of a scale that makes significant contribution, but adds to the attractiveness of the built environment, and refers to householder proposals being assessed under the design guide. Which I have those criteria here. Extensions should be architectural compatible in design and scale with the original house. Materials should be complementary. Extensions should not overwhelm or dominate the original form of the house. Extensions approved prior to the guidance wouldn't be justification. Adjoining semis should be consistent in roof form. I've got the slide on that. And then there's various specific criteria in terms of the positioning of dormers on roofs and glazing being at the end of dormers. So looking at the specific guidance on hip to roof extensions and the guidance that the practice of extending a hip to roof on one half of a pair of semis will not be accepted unless the other half of the building has already been altered in this way. And evaluation should be in accordance with the policies in the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, and each application treated on its merits. The basis for decision, would the proposals comply with policy H1 on residential areas? Is the proposal compatible with the original house and does it unbalance the pair to the detriment of the street and area? Do the dormers overwhelm the roof slope to the detriment of the area? And overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan, taking into account the householder guide, which is significantly material, or are there material considerations indicating otherwise? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Does anyone have any questions? Not seeing any hands. In accordance with procedure note circulated, local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which reviews to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. When I turn to determination, I am minded to overturn the officer's recommendations. I think much of the conditions around this would have been highlighted in the previous application, and I'm happy to put on the additional condition of the materials to be again submitted just for crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Is anyone minded differently?
Look, can I just add a couple of comments? I'm supportive of your position, convener, but I also think I think it's good that the chimney's been kept as a feature, because it is something that's a commonplace to the other houses. And I think actually not reducing the size of the garden by building out into the garden, I think also helps with policy 1 and policy 3 of the National Planning Framework, in terms of being able to have a green space which can encourage insects and birds, etc. So, I think there's certain merits with, where we're building over an existing property. So for me, we've said it, as you say previously, but I think the relevant policies that we discussed, I think, are very much relevant from the last one into this one. So I won't reiterate, but I reiterate, if you like, what I said previously would fall within this one. So if Mrs. Christie needs any further explanation on my views, I've already said them once. She can take them from there. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Fonts.
Thank you, convener. I agree with Councillor Bolton.
Okay,
I see
thank
no
you.
problem with granting it permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I'm in agreement with yourself.
Thank you. Ms. Green, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the difference between the two is that the other half of this semi doesn't have the roof altered, and I just wondered if you wanted to add something specifically about that point into the reason.
Do you want me to say?
Yeah, Councillor Bolton, do you want to come back on that one?
Clearly, one half has to be the first half, unless
Mhm.
you've obviously got an agreement with both neighbours doing it at the same time. And again, it's back to do we want houses that were built for
Mhm.
the 1940s, you said, or do we want them fit for purpose today? And it's for that reason that, to allow people to extend and utilise existing buildings for today's purposes. That's why I'm certainly comfortable that we do allow, sensitive and well thought out extensions to allow families to grow within the space they've got. And hopefully that, I appreciate that it would be ideal if we could get both to do at the same time. But, if we've seen in other applications where one half is gone and one's still being the traditional, but hopefully that will have a template for anybody in the other side in the future. Thank you.
Absolutely, wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. Somebody's got to be the first to move. So therefore, as the local review body has agreed to overturn decisions of the appointing officer, we need to consider any further conditions before we go for final approval, but I think we're content with the materials and therefore we're happy to overturn. Thank you very much. Councillor Lawrence, I understand you need to step away for the next one if you're still on the call, but I think you're on hold. That's fine, you can still stay to observe. Okay, okay. So now turning to consideration of the fourth and final review in respect to the decision to refuse the application to extension of dwelling garage to front of Scarra Dawn, Pitmedden Road, Dice, Aberdeen 230757. We'll hear again from Planning Advisor and Tenants, Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. Again, I point out Ms. Green attends to provide us with necessary professional planning guidance because she's not been involved in the application up until now. Ms. Green.
Thank you. Right, I'll just share my screen. So this review is into the refusal of the application for an extension to an existing garage to the front at Scarra Dawn, Pitmedden Road, Dice. And the review was submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. With the notice of review, there are some new matters and others that were raised with the case officer but didn't form part of the application submissions. These consist of a number of new drawings showing a revised proposal. So just to be clear, the proposal I will be showing you in the presentation is the one that was refused permission, and that must form the basis of the decision. In terms of procedure by which the review will be conducted, the applicant has expressed the view that there should be a site visit and the review should proceed. The review should not proceed solely on the basis of the information submitted. So I'll continue to provide some background information to the case before handing back to you, convener, for members to decide how to proceed. So this is the location plan. This is just to place the house. This is the AWPR, just coming around the airport, which is down here. This is the boundary between the city and the Shire, the River Don, and the application property is here. And then the larger scale plan. This is Scarra Don, the house that the application relates to, and the applicant has ownership of the whole site, which also includes this cottage. And that's overhead picture taken from Google Maps. Site lies within the Greenbelt, and the nearest houses are 170 to 200 metres away to the southwest. And then this is taken from Street View. So the application house, Scarra Don, is this one at the back, and then this one is Beadleston Cottage to the front. And as you'll see from the submissions, there's some indication that the applicant intends to demolish the cottage. There was an application for prior notification for demolition put in. Whether or not that demolition happens is not something controlled by planning. It's just another image taken from Street View and slightly further back. I think this one is a later date. The previous one was 2011. This is 2021. And then this is taken from the applicant's submissions, just showing from the south. So this is the garage that the proposal relates to, the extension of this garage. This is Scarra Don, the main house, and then Beadleston Cottage to the front. And again, taken from the application's submissions. This is the garage that would be extended and the extension would come out. Whoop, sorry. This garage has been removed now, and the extension would come out to the side here. And this is a site plan showing the location of that former garage. So this is the one that would be extended, and this is where the former garage was located. So this site plan just shows the existing situation where that garage has been demolished. The house remains, and then in this one, this is showing the cottage removed from the site, which hasn't happened, and it's showing the extension to the garage. And on plan, the existing garage here, and then the extension. So the extension is noted as being just under 48 square metres in footprint. The external measurements are that it would be 6.78 metres across and around 8 metres in length. And The report of handling notes a footprint of 54 square metres, which would be the external dimensions. And it also notes that overall, the existing garage of 67 metres squared and the extension of 54 metres squared makes a total of 112 metres squared for the footprints of the garage, both double garages. And then moving on to the elevations, showing the existing and then the proposed highlighted. And that's the end elevation, that elevation of the extension to the garage. That's to the rear, showing the extension. And then that's the end elevation of the existing garage. You wouldn't see the extension from that angle. And this is showing, so the existing elevation from the southeast. So it just shows that you would see the end of the former garage. That's what that's showing there behind the cottage. So it's looking from this direction. You would have seen the end of that. And this proposed elevation is sort of assuming that the cottage has been demolished. You would see the gable end of the extended garage. And then that's pink line is just showing the existing garage there and the house behind. So if the cottage was demolished, that would be the elevation that you would see. And this is looking from the north west to the back of the newer house, Scaradon, sorry. And you can just see the existing garage. You wouldn't see the extension from there. So it's just showing that corner of the existing garage. So this is showing the elevation from the north here. That's the former garage that sat on the site. And then this is a sort of cut, well, it cuts here. So you can see the edge of the former garage and then the rear elevation of the existing garage. So the extension would be in here. And there it is shown in relation to Scaradon house. So that's looking from the southwest at the front of the existing garage with the extension. It's looking from there. And then the same as existing, but with the garage that's now been demolished to the rear of the cottage. And then these are massing diagrams. So you can see that this is showing the dwelling, the cottage and the garage as being removed. And then as proposed with the extension. And again, from a different angle with the cottage removed and as proposed with the extension. And these were submitted with the applicant's statement. And they show materials for the garage extension as matching the house. And they are dry dash to the walls, concrete tiles to the roof, 5 stone quoins, and matching garage door with UPVC windows. There's windows in the end gable there. That's showing the end gable of the extension to the garage. So reasons for the decision from the case officer's report. The house sits within the green belt, so it's within that context. They state that it's of inappropriate scale, massing, footprint and design for an ancillary domestic building, that it's visually dominant in the context of the existing dwelling, the plot and the surrounding area, that it fails to respect the context and wider character of the green belt with an adverse visual impact, that it's contrary to policy on the green belt, design, amenity and parking, policies on design, amenity and parking in the local development plan, and that there's some conflict with policy 1 on tackling climate and nature crises, policy 2 on climate mitigation, policy 8 on green belts, policy 14 on design, policy 16 on quality homes in the national planning framework, and that those policies seek climate conscious and well-designed development that does not have a detrimental impact on the character of the surrounding area. The applicant's case is I've got on a couple of slides. Firstly, that the garage extension would replace the steel garage that's to the rear of the cottage, and it's of lesser massing and improved appearance. They clarify that the cottage is in the ownership of the applicant and that permission has been granted for its removal. Also, the existing garage to Scaradon is not forward of the building line as the cottage still exists. They state that the application had been submitted for the demolition of the cottage and the steel garage, as well as the garage extension. That was an application that was withdrawn that they're referring to there. And they go on to say that the planning authority advised that there should be separate applications, which means that the proposals haven't been considered holistically. They confirm that the original garage and parking areas have been in place for almost 30 years. That the garage proposal should be considered in the context of the larger plot size, which would include the plot of the cottage once the cottage is removed. They state that the materials match the house Scaradon, and that it's less visually intrusive to have vehicles in a garage than outside. They also propose changes by condition at the end of their statement. So they propose conditions that would affect the footprint of the garage extension, the roof massing, and would remove windows from the gable. And then further points from the applicant. They state that there's no tension with the policy 1 on climate crisis, as the overall emissions would reduce on the site with fewer vehicles and emissions from houses. That's referring to the cottage being removed. They state that the existing steel shed would be reused elsewhere and that it's been sold, whilst the proposal removes an alien feature from the site. They also state that although a small-scale development, the proposal would increase biodiversity by increasing the garden after the demolition of the cottage. They state that the proposal is single-storey and complies with the householder guidance. They state that the garage would be subordinate in scale to the main house, that plot coverage is accepted by the case officer. The applicant doesn't agree that there is an increase in coverage because the steel garage is removed and the cottage would also be removed. With the cottage removed, the garage extension would be seen against the profile of the existing house and garage. The applicant also states that they would accept a hipped roof and removal of the window, and that the garage is not excessively large in the context of the plot and relationship to the house. And finally, that parking already exists on site and that the garage extension would allow for storage of vehicles. And I've just, on the next slide, picked out an image from the statement, which shows. So this is approaching along the road to the east, and it assumes that the cottage would be demolished. And it also assumes that a new wall would be built across the site. That's not part of the application and may or may not require permission, depending on its height and distance from the road. So just to point out that that's obviously the extension to the garage. And that this is approaching from the south on Pitmeadow Road, assuming again the removal of the cottage, and it's showing a wall that's not in that position at the moment. Just before I hand back, I have this slide which shows the planning history, as there are quite a few applications mentioned. So that first one, prior notification for the demolition and the other works, that prior notification, it was found that it wasn't, prior approval wasn't required, which is when the planning authority can ask for further details. So the demolition was agreed. It's not actually a planning application, it's a prior notification. That prior notification was withdrawn. And then this is a certificate of lawfulness for the erection of the garage to the rear of the cottage, and erection of garage and formation of driveway at Scarradon. And finally, there were no objections from the roads team, the community council, no comments received from them. So at this point, I'll hand back to you, convener, for members to decide how to proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Green. So we now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members, reminder, if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request further written information to be provided, hearings to be arranged, or a site visit to be undertaken. At this moment, with the amount of drawings that have been submitted to us that Ms. Green has taken us through the slides, I'm content that we have sufficient information to proceed. But I'll quickly go around the room. Councillor Alphonse.
Agreed.
And Councillor Bolton.
Agreed. I appreciate there was a request for a site visit, but I'm content with it, as you say, convener, the number of drawings supplied. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's go through the sheet. As members now feel they have sufficient information, we'll now pass back to Ms. Green again on the relevant policies and considerations for the review. Ms. Green.
Yep, I'll just share my screen again. So turning to the policies, and first of all, National Planning Framework policies. Again, policies 1, 2 and 3 are overarching. The case officer does pick up on a couple of points in terms of those such as the removal of the, rather than reuse of the previous garage, and the accommodation for the number of vehicles on site. But a principal policy for consideration in terms of this, of the NPF4, would be policy 8 on Greenbelt. Again, there's also design policy which relates to all proposals really for physical works, and also policy 16 on quality homes, which I'll cover in a minute. The policy 8 on Greenbelt, there's a general presumption against development within the Greenbelt. However, one of the exceptions to that is where there's intensification of established uses, and that includes extensions to existing buildings where they're ancillary to the main use. And that is providing the following requirements are met. The first ones aren't particularly relevant. Those three. This one, the proposal is compatible with the surrounding established countryside and landscape character. So that's one of the considerations in the determination. Also, whether the proposal has been designed to ensure it's of appropriate scale, massing and external appearance, and uses materials that minimise visual impact on the Greenbelt as far as possible. And also there will be no significant long-term impact on the quality of the Greenbelt. So policy 16 on quality homes. In relation to householder development, that has a couple of criteria for supporting those. One of them relates to the impact on character or environmental quality of the home and the surrounding area. And secondly, detrimental impact on neighbouring properties in terms of physical impact, etc. Because obviously the neighbouring properties in this case are some distance away. The adopted local development plan, again, the proposal is zoned within the Greenbelt. So I'll have a separate slide on that Greenbelt policy, which I'll show to you in a moment. Policy D1 refers to design. D2, which has been mentioned in the report, relates to privacy, daylighting, sunlighting, and also visual impacts of proposals. And policy T3 on parking guides the levels of parking in various locations. And then once again, in terms of design for householder applications, there's the Aberdeen Planning Guidance, the Householder Development Guide. So policy on Greenbelt in the local plan, again, there are exceptions to the general presumption against, and those are only supported where the proposal also complies with these criteria. And criteria D is the one that's relevant here. Proposals are associated with existing activities in the Greenbelt. Within the boundary of that activity, they are small scale and don't significantly increase the intensity. And also in terms of built construction, they are subordinate to what already exists. And that includes extensions to existing dwellings. And moving on to the householder design guidance. In terms of outbuildings, this has various points of guidance. So this is about outbuildings being subordinate in scale to the dwelling house. It says two-storey outbuildings won't generally be accepted. This second criteria also relates to second stories. The applicant had obviously confirmed that there isn't a second story intended within the extension to the garage. This guidance also notes that outbuildings should retain the impression of being single story in height. Outbuildings shouldn't have a negative impact on the character of the surrounding area. Where they're highly visible, garages should be of a scale and design that respects the context of the surrounding area. Talk about amenity in terms of daylighting and privacy, and that outbuildings would not usually be acceptable in front gardens because of the impact of development forward of a building line on the visual character of an area. Obviously, in terms of design, we've just looked at the householder guidance, and this is the more general policy that just recognises that all development can make a contribution in terms of good design to the attractiveness of the built environment. And then finally, evaluation is in terms of policies in the development plan, national planning framework, and the local plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So the basis for this decision: would the proposals comply with Greenbelt policy? And would they, in terms of that, how would they affect the character and visual amenity of the area? Is the scale and massing appropriate in the Greenbelt? And would the extension be visually dominant? And overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan, or are there material considerations indicating otherwise? Just also to add that in considering those questions, members may wish to consider both the scenario of the cottage remaining and also that it may be demolished, because whether or not the cottage is removed is not controlled by planning in this instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Green. Do any members have questions? I have hands. So, Councillor Alphonse.
Thank you, convener. The first question was the cottage uninhabitable? Is that why they want to demolish it? Second question is what's going to be used? How is the granite going to be reused? Is it going to be reused within the site, or is there a plan for that at all? And so we're looking to double the size of the garage, is that correct? Or just over double the size, doubling the size of it?
Well, I'll answer that one first. It wouldn't quite double it. The existing is 67 square meters and the proposed extension is 54. So it's a bit less than doubling it.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of the cottage, that doesn't look as if it was uninhabitable, but it's not the subject of the application. It's just the extension to the garage that we would consider. So the reuse of granite would also be not relevant to this application.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms Green. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, convener. First one, the window, the second sort of looks like a second story in the extension. We've got a window up top. There's not an extra. They've said that there won't be a second floor, but I'm just a bit confused why there's a window. So obviously I don't know what the internal configuration in terms of flooring and battens and stuff. So it's just to get confirmation. Is that just a feature, or it's not got a practical use as such?
No, I mean, the applicant has confirmed there wouldn't be a second story. They could use that, storage in the roof space if they wished. It may be to like that, but I don't have any further information on its purpose.
Okay, and the second one would be around the demolition of the cottage. Now, I think this, if we look at the positioning of the extension to the cottage currently, I'd have major concerns with it being quite so close. Now, would we, if we were minded to approve this, and I'm not saying we are, but would it be competent for us to put a condition to say that this can only be started once the demolition, given it's under the ownership, so it is that within their gift, has been demolished? Because we don't know what might be kept in the garage, and my concern is if there's any flammable stuff, etc., next that close, that would give me concern about the impact on the amenity of anybody living in the other cottage and their safety.
I mean, I suppose there might be a question that there was a garage in that location. To require the cottage to be, the garage to be only erected after the cottage was demolished. I mean, I guess as the applicant's in control, we could do that.
Because the previous one, I think it was there, didn't have planning, did it? Had been erected without planning. Is that correct?
I think yes, I think it was the certificate of
so it wasn't like we had given planning for that garage. It just appeared.
Yes.
Probably the final question, it's around the suggestion that there may be a wall, but part of the statement from the applicant was that they would be able to have a bigger garden, but it seems if they're kind of hiving off. I mean, I know they haven't put in an application for the wall, but just the drawings would suggest they're almost creating a secondary plot, which, given there had been a house previously on that, they would be entitled to apply. So I'm just a bit confused that the two seem to conflict slightly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they would be entitled to apply in the future. I think the point about the garden was probably in relation to the policy on the nature crisis and biodiversity. Just increasing green space, but yes, obviously in the future a further application could be made.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, convener. That's all my questions.
Thank you very much. If there's no further questions, we will move on. So in accordance with the procedure note circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide on a matter in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case are being considered and taken into account. Determination.
Do you want me to start?
Uh,
No, carry on. No, carry on.
yeah.
Convener, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there.
Yeah, I'm minded to overturn in relation to the green belt and green space if we're demolishing. I know it's not within the confines of this application entirely, but if we are demolishing the cottage to the front, then it does obviously expand the amount of green space we have to the property, and it also creates a bit of a boundary from the road to the garage itself, so therefore it'd be far enough away from the road. It wouldn't be detrimental to views and etc. to that. In terms of the window, I think the window gives an impression that there may be a second story to this garage, and potential further development within that garage itself to if there was a second lower or upper space to be put into there. I think that window could be a little bit problematic, but I'm minded to give guidance to the members and that we have here to see what we want to do with that. So at the moment, yeah, I'm minded towards overturning, but I'm happy to be guided by Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, I would be supportive of you, convener. I would want to put in some sort of condition that I think they'll have to come back with in terms of the demolition of the cottage, because I would be concerned with it being too close to that cottage. The window, it can kind of, suppose, give an almost cottagey sort of maybe view to the road. So I am concerned that it could be, but I think if they try to go for any change of use, they'd have to come back to us anyway for planning. But the other condition that I'd want to put on is maybe some landscaping so that it softens the impact of that big building. So yeah, if you were minded to approve it, subject to the condition around the demolition of the cottage and some landscaping, I'd be comfortable to approve it with, if that's where you're headed.
Yep, I'd be comfortable accepting that. It's absolutely reasonable. Councillor Alphonse.
Thank you, convener. I agree. I don't see a major problem with that at all. I would also like to say I would like to see the granite reused, maybe. You know, that I know it's not up to us at this point, but I would like to think there would be, you know, it would be reused. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we're pretty much in agreement to overturn with the additional stipulations on the conditions of the landscaping and for the demolition of the cottage to take place before building of the garage. I'm seeing nodding heads. Therefore,
can I just add one point, convener, as well?
We'll bring in Ms. Christie after that as well.
Okay, it's just in regard to obviously policy 8 and NE1, which is Greenbelt. Again, I think we need to make it clear that this is an established building. It's not an extra building, and that's why I feel that the considerations in terms of the Greenbelt, whilst there are certain tensions, I feel that I'm comfortable that we can overcome those because it's already there.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Ms. Christie.
Yes, convener, members. My point was along the same lines as Councillor Bolton. It's just to make sure you mention policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yeah, policy 8 and policy NE1D in terms of Greenbelt. This is not adding, it's continuation of the current building. So I'm content with that at the moment. Therefore, if we have nothing further. Perfect. So that is the application overturned from the appointing officer with the added conditions as mentioned in terms of the landscaping. I've forgotten the other one, but I think it was mentioned.
Demolition of the cottage before work starts.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that's that done, and that will be issued to the applicant or agent in the forthcoming days. That brings a close to this meeting today. Thank you very much for all participation from members and officers, and we'll see you in the next one.